Guys, hi. We're gonna start in like 2 minutes. We're just kind of looking everyone to come in. Big group, so it's basically this smaller. So if you don't know me, my name is Joshua. I've been the regular facilitator for the past few events, except the one we're in. For the past few months, it has been a very interesting year for AgilePH, because for the past few months we've really dug down on what are the fundamentals that makes a good product manager. So last January we started with talking about how to build the right thing, and then last February we talked about how to say no to your stakeholders for facilitating stakeholders management, which we believe the more important things. The third month in our series really is how to build software really, which is basically building fast and slow. It's gonna be primarily about when and how to use Agile and what are the different components of Agile. I'm pretty sure almost everyone here has heard some version of Agile, but almost everyone here has also worked in role of Agile, which means you think it's Agile, but not because you can change something every day, it's totally Agile. So, are we ready?
I think before we start, we should move a little bit because I expect more people will come late. So
yeah, so you can move forward there. So just please, who here has been who here is the worst student been? There are also a lot of familiar faces, but there's also a lot of new faces. So it's interesting that so guys, we're gonna start in a bit. So it's interesting that we are now at least starting. Guys, we cannot like talk all at once because the room is small. So someone down here will be heard over here. So basically, it's interesting that we started I think maybe a year ago. We're just maybe 7 or 8 people in a diner or a coffee shop in Amarsono, and now we have a lot of people. And we're now in like big companies like Zalora and everything. We're gonna start off a bit. Again, my name is Joshua. I am from Machine Ventures, but I've been with product ever since it started. Andreas and Yana and Brian founded it, and we're now at our, I think, roughly our 2nd year. Andreas, 2nd year? This is our 2nd year.
Like 1 month and 2 years?
1 year and 2 months. So to those who are new, it's a different type of meetups. We don't like just people talking. We like people talking to each other. So one of the core components of a product meetup, or product PH meetup is you listen to someone who is an expert of what he does, and then you're going to also be talking to a lot of people within this room. But before we get started, we're going to first, we have to thank first our gracious sponsor today, which is basically Zalora. And here to talk about Zalora is, what's your name?
Hi, I'm Kat. So,
Hi, Kat.
I'm the local PM here in the Philippines. So basically, we have our office in SG. So we have another PM based in here, but unfortunately, he can't join the meetup because he's on a business trip in SG. So to introduce Zalora, so how many of you have staff in Zalora?
My wife. My wife.
So, Zalora started sometime in 2012. So, that makes 6 years last March. So, currently, Zalora is visible in 6 countries in Southeast Asia. So, we have our offices in SG, Malaysia, Vietnam. But we do have our dev office, tech shop in Vietnam, and Taiwan, Hong Kong, Indonesia, and here in the Philippines. So So basically, most of our apps that we use, including the platform, is built in-house. As I said, we have our tech office in Vietnam as well as in SG. So, that's it.
Yeah, so Zalora, you actually know it as an e-commerce site. But what's interesting about it is they're trying to solve also the last mile delivery, or like delivery of actual products. So they only not only do they take care of the actual shopping, but the actual delivery of the package to you. So it's a very interesting tech stack if you want to learn more about it. But outside Zalora, we now come to our speaker. And if you've been following Agile for some time now, it's impossible for you not to have heard about him. But anyway, so Ian will probably have to introduce himself, but he's been in a lot of things. And if I read you his resume and his accomplishments, it's like a list of really great things. So, not to take anything away, Ian.
Hey guys, good evening, and thanks for coming here. So I guess I'll have to introduce myself. My name is Ian Pestelos. I've been doing using Agile Frameworks for almost 10 years now, with different companies, telco, banks, startups. I've extensively used it in startups before as well, so the experience is vast, but at the same time dispersed as well. I work with, right now I work with ING, the bank, here in BGC as well. So I typically work with organizations moving to Agile way of working, or to organizations just starting up and trying to be more agile with what they do. Just so I get a gauge of the room, how many of you have been in Agile projects before? Alright, so how many of you has not heard Agile and you're here? I'm gonna be scared. No? Okay. So I guess you have some idea of what Scrum is, what daily stand-ups are, retrospectives. Okay, pretty good. Because I'm not going to be discussing any of those in detail. I'm going to be discussing something that's, I think, abstracted on a higher level from what the practices that you usually have heard of are. Just before we get started, I asked the Product PH guys if you can get a post-it and write down your questions. But I don't think everyone has post-its. Maybe later on, if you can pass around post-its, what we want to do is after my talk, it's just going to be around 18 to 20 minutes. Hopefully we get to have a set of questions that we can answer, and then we'll jump on to a fishbowl type of facilitation. So when we do fishbowl, I'm not just the I'm not an expert here. I'm still learning a lot of things Agile. I'm still learning a lot of things about product as well. I've been a product manager before as well, so I can speak about that side of things. And then I'd like to invite you, who has already worked on an Agile project before, to be able to speak up as well. I have a few colleagues here that's part of the Agile Philippines community, so we have Ilden here, say hi. I expect you to help out, facilitate later on, because you're an expert on Agile. So.
Thanks for Agile.
And JM here from Agile Philippines as well. Say hi, JM. So I've worked with him before for twice. Yeah, I've worked with him twice. Never learned. So a lot of the things I'm sharing, he already has grasp on this. All right. So I'll do a 18 to 20 minute talk about Agile in general, but then I'd like you to focus more on the practices that you do, how it relates to the presentation I'm going to be doing. Fair enough? All good? At any point you have questions, just raise your hand. I'm happy to answer those as we go along. All right, so I'd like to play, with the theme of the meetups usually. That's why I said building beyond fast and slow. For one thing, I think Agile is usually thought of as building things fast. But at the same time, I think it's also creating a lot of mess when we think of Agile as being fast-paced. I don't know where I should stand, so I don't get to block you guys from seeing the presentation. You're all good? Okay. If I can sit down or maybe lie down. Right. So let's get on with this. So just a tribute to Stephen Hawking. He said, I think the next century will be the century of complexity. That's what we're facing right now. So if you guys are working on products, working on projects, working with people, that's where you are at the moment. We're dealing with a lot of complexity, uncertainty, risk, volatility, a lot of those things. Now, just an outline of the talk that we're going to be doing. First is what the F is Agile. And then I'll share 2 product stories just because we're product PH here, and I'd like to pin it down to how some companies use Agile as a way of developing products. And then I'll go back to the question, what the F is Agile really? And then get you some advice from my experience on coaching organizations with Agile, or also being a product manager myself using Agile Frameworks. Yeah, WTF, he just said it. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so maybe you've seen this. Scrum. Anyone who has not heard of Scrum? I think everyone has heard of like daily stand-ups or retrospectives, Scrum Master, product owners. You know this stuff. So typically when we think of Agile, unfortunately we always think of Scrum. Iterative delivery every 2 weeks or 4 weeks. We do product backlogs, potentially shippable product increments. Some of you have seen this. Rather than build it incrementally, where traditional waterfall, you design the wheel first and then get to the car after 1 to 2 years or 10 years, in the case of the UK government. We try to do it iteratively in terms of delivering value as quickly as possible, like a scooter or a skateboard, building a bike. I think it's a bad metaphor, to be honest. But at the same time, it may communicate some value. Maybe just delivering iteratively in terms of value. That's the thing there. You've seen this. We like it so much. And it's if you look at this framework, it's called SAFe, Scaled Agile Framework. A lot of Agile practitioners bash SAFe simply because it's not safe to use this, because you have a lot of things going on. It's like a big process framework rather than something that you can use to adopt your products. If you notice, it's been truncated down below. I can't do anything about it simply because they have a longer slide down below, and that's safe for you. But then at the same time, what is Agile really? You could think of it as a framework. Maybe it's a culture of work. Maybe it's about speed. And we'll try to answer that during this session. At least from my perspective, what Agile is. By the way, your Agile is not my Agile, so we just agree on a certain set of principles, but bear in mind that it's very much contextually pinned. It's heavily reliant on the context of your organization, your goals, your teams. So I'll share with you a story about Newsmodo. Newsmodo is a product in Australia. I worked with them before in 2013 with Oxygen Ventures. That's where JM and I has worked. Newsmodo is a news platform. So if you're walking down the street, you saw someone being mugged, you take your phone, take a video rather than save them, right? And then you can upload that to this platform. You can sell your video. That's the goal of the product. So we're building a web interface, mobile apps around it. We have a big platform underlying that for file management and content management. So this is quite a big product. We did this in 3 months. The MVP was built in 3 months in an agile manner using Scrum. So we deliver every 2 weeks. The product manager sees that, the CEO actually sees that, who's also coincidentally the product owner. And then he validates whether we've delivered the right thing. Sounds familiar to you? Right? Every 2 weeks we deliver something. And then the product owner signs off, okay, I'm happy with that, or no, sorry, it's not good enough. And then 3 months after, we launched it to the public. Australia and I think US. It was a massive failure. It was built using Scrum, but then when we launched it, we only earned like $300 Australian in a month. That's how bad it is. Now the problem with this is not Scrum or Agile. The problem here is not learning fast enough from your customers. So not validating as early as possible. That's why I usually like working with UX I also like working with like startups because you have to iterate fast because you only have like a limited runway. So the lesson here that I wanted to get started with is that there's no use iteratively delivering the solution if you're not iteratively learning the problem. So even if you use Agile, that's not the solution. Don't feel like when you use Scrum, it's going to solve your problems. That's only a starting point and like 1% of the entire thing. So going back here, is it a framework? Yes, we use it as a framework for developing software. And then, is it a culture? Yeah, we try to deliver things every 2 weeks. We have like, pizza every 2 weeks as well. We have a fun culture. We have a nice workspace. Yes, Jayan? That's actually sarcasm because we work in a call center environment. Very constricted. But at the same time, we're a high-performing team as far as we can think. At least from our perspective. Is it about speed? 3 months? Web, mobile platform? It's speed, right? I mean, have you delivered anything in 3 months? Yeah, of course, maybe, but miserably failed? Maybe not. So, Agile here is not necessarily any of these things. Maybe it's any of these things, but at the same time, it's not going to give you the success you wanted. So, Agile is just a starting point. Now, we could go on talking about some of the big companies using Agile. And I like this diagram simply because ING is there and they're like side by side with Spotify and everything else. But at the same time, what we're trying to say here is that they built good engineering culture. Do you agree? Google, Spotify, so they have really good engineering culture. That's what I've seen with ING as well. It's a very tech-centric company. Flip side to other organizations where the business side is quite strong. Here, the stronger bit is the IT. So it's a totally different experience. What I learned here was that when we build products, it doesn't matter whether we build it in a Scrum way or in a scaled Agile way. If we don't meet the deadline in 6 months with this new team I'm working with, we don't have a team to speak of anyway. So we can do Agile all day, which is fine, but then if we don't focus on the outcome we need to deliver, Agile is useless. So Agile is, again, maybe a framework, maybe a culture, maybe it's a process, but then you need to focus on the outcomes as well. Again, Agile is a starting point. You need to cultivate and nurture highly engaged teams, ruthlessly focus on outcomes, and have bias for action. So these are things that are not necessarily embedded on the Agile frameworks that you may know. Scrum, Kanban, Crystal, XP, any of those things. So again, going back, it is a framework, fine. It's a good culture, fine. We deliver fast, fine. But still won't solve our problems altogether. So what I'm trying to say here is that Agile is not the goal, it's means to an end. And what we're trying to build here is not the frameworks, not the practices, not daily stand-up every day, not do retrospectives and have pizza, or not have post-its on the wall, or not have daily stand-up with a ball you pass around and throw to the teammate that you feel like is not performing. It's not those things. It's about using Agile as a means to an end. So the core message I want to talk about is learning through experiments. And when we talk about learning through experiments, we don't realize that the iterations is actually experimentation as well. Retrospective is experimentation. The practices we have are all experiments as well. So Agile is necessary, but it's not sufficient. So how can we move from that? So even if we do stand-ups every day, we do a release strategy that once every 2 weeks we deliver potentially shippable product. Maybe we do story sizes, user stories. What can we do? If it's not going to work, how can we move better using Agile frameworks? I'd like to offer some advice. So just a quick one to reframe this. Agile is actually a learning framework. It's not a software delivery framework. That's why a lot of companies nowadays are trying to be Agile. So it's not a process. It's not a software development framework. It's a learning framework using experiments. So I'll give you some tips on this, and this is where it could get messy because this will impact some of how you guys, some of the way you work, on how you're working at the moment. One, overcome template zombieing. Who uses user stories? Raise your hand, you're using that. So what do you usually do? You write down as a, so that, as a, I want to, so that. Right. Do you like it? No? Why? Because you have to think of the words you have to put in there. Sometimes it's only as a, I want to, right? You don't have the so that anymore. And sometimes, we get penalized. Why are you not writing user stories with this format? And we get crucified. One thing I'd like to tell you about user stories, it's called that way simply because you have to tell stories. It's not about how you write them. It's only a reminder of what you need to write down, or more importantly, it's a reminder of what you need to talk to with your teams. So even if you have user stories, you have to take that user stories, get to your team, ask them to listen what the story is, and then invite them to ask questions. So right now in the company I work with, we don't write user stories that way because it distracts everyone from the goal, which is about communication. So you need to also dive into the principles substance over form. How are you guys doing daily stand-ups now? Who among you asked the 3 questions? The 3 golden questions. A lot of teams, right? Anyone was deviated from the 3 questions? Any brave soul was deviated? Okay, what do you guys do?
We just run through the board. So one team member facilitates its rotating role. Then they just run through the board and talk about whatever they feel is important to do.
Alright, so you focus on the work.
Yeah.
Right. In Kanban, they extend that by focusing on the right column first before the left. So you start finishing rather than you start something again. Who else has changed their daily stand-ups? Anyone? Or you don't have daily stand-ups? Which is okay as well. So one way we've changed the daily stand-ups is we don't ask the questions, but we focus on what do we want to achieve as a team every day. We just list them down on the board. What else? This is something I posted on my Facebook account the other day. A lot of you may have seen it who are connected with me on Facebook. We do 3 team stand-ups a day. Don't ask the 3 questions, and no Scrum Master. We're Agile. Thoughts? So some of the comments focused on, you're not Agile, or yes, you're not Scrum, but maybe you're Agile, and a lot of different flavors. Or some people ask, why do you have 3 stand-ups? 2 stand-ups is already too much, then why you have 3? And then someone said, breakfast, lunch, and merienda. Very clever, right? No, we don't do breakfast, lunch, and merienda. It's more of like, we want to ruthlessly focus on this one team's progress because we need to catch up. And the only way they can do that is to closely collaborate on a daily basis and identify the blockers. It's not going to be a forever thing for that team. It's an interim thing for that team because they need to. No Scrum Master. Some people feel like, you're not Scrum if you don't have a Scrum Master. That's true if you look at the Scrum Guide. So if you look at the Scrum Guide, they need the Scrum Master role, but you can still be Agile even if you don't have Scrum Masters. The Scrum Masters are team coaches. If you have a team coach on your group, then that's good. You have someone helping you be more Agile or use Scrum on the right manner. Next one, if this works. Manage the system. So what I usually say to managers, managers are afraid of Agile. I'm not sure if you realize that. When we move to Agile, they feel like they don't have work anymore. To some extent, that's true. But not all the time. Usually, the managers that don't get to survive in this way of working are people who fail to adapt. But managers still have purpose or rules or goals within the Agile framework. They manage the system, not the people. That framework changes. You have to start looking into the people's competency, to their environment, to how they work together, how they do stand-ups maybe and coach them. So it's a different frame of mind for managers now. But the problem is soft skills are the hard skills. Who among you feel like your team is not communicating enough when you're talking? Who among you are product managers, by the way? Product managers? Do you feel like, when you talk to people, they just feel, you feel like they're not talking enough, they're silent, they climb up to their own shell? Sometimes? Sometimes? Especially if you're the boss and you're also a product manager, sometimes people feel like, I don't want to, say blockers because I might get penalized or something. I don't want to introduce 3 stand-ups a day because otherwise. So, as product people, maybe developers, engineers, UX, we're all product people, by the way. We're a product team. That's one thing I wanted to also reframe. We're not a Scrum team, we're a product team. When you talk about building products within a Scrum framework, of course you can call them Scrum team, but you have to think that everyone contributes to the product, not just the product manager or product owner. Now, when you put it into this context, you have to develop as well the skills of your people. So if you've heard of radical candor or crucial conversations, you need to create an environment where people feel safe to talk. Not necessarily, expected to just talk and feel like they have to because it's their job. So if you've seen Google's structure or at least study, they said that there are 5 elements to teams' effectiveness. When they study their teams, they have like 5 attributes they say are needed for effective teams. First one is psychological safety. The challenge for you here, to each and every one of you, is how can we create that environment? How can you create a safe environment while still meeting outcomes? Because we're used to commanding rather than facilitating or coaching people. But then, if you want to create a safe environment, you have to consider soft skills, your own soft skills to start with. Then, third of the 3 out of 4 advice, forest for the trees. Have you heard the saying? Don't lose the forest for the trees. So make sure you focus ruthlessly on outcome. Again, if you go back to my sort of like starting engagement with this bank, I have to get started with, if we don't deliver the product in time, then we probably won't have a team at all. Then, do I still want to like have retrospectives and have kumbaya, we celebrate and hold hands, jump together and celebrate what we've done well? Then maybe we have to change that a bit. One thing we found with the current Agile teams I'm working, change has become the norm. Like we change every 2 weeks and people complain, but at the same time we change, we adapt to it. Because that's the culture. So when you go back to my 3 questions earlier, I don't think culture is a target. Culture is a result of being ruthlessly focused on outcomes, focused on the customer, focused on delivering every 2 weeks, focused on collaborating much closer. Then it's a good outcome. But then you don't focus on the culture first and then worry about the outcomes later on. I'm not sure if you've heard of this story. Simon Sinek, he said he was running with a colleague. I think they were in a marathon or something. And then they saw a line. There's a long line, long queue, going to a big table which has bagels. And then he said to his partner, hey, free bagels. And then his partner said, well, don't you see the line? And he said, well, free bagels. And he said, line, bagel, line, bagel, line. So what he concluded there, his realization was that some people only see the line. I can only see the bagel. So the message here is that if we can ruthlessly focus on what we're trying to get, maybe we look for ways how to get that bagel without violating everyone else's cue or everyone else's preference. But then you have to make sure you focus on the outcome, what you want, rather than the constraint or the cost of doing things like the cue. So again, focus ruthlessly on the outcomes that you want. Last one is mind your gaps. So you need to raise your standards, get feedback, what's your unconscious incompetence. This is important for product managers or product team members. You don't know what you don't know. Have you ever experienced like there's a manager that walked to you, gave you a performance feedback after a year and you feel like you were punched in the face? because that feedback was like a year old or like 6 months old, and then you didn't know that it's going to be a problem. So some of us have that, and we wish we had that feedback right then and there. So I was notorious as a, like a 5-minute manager, because I always ask people, hey, do you have 5 minutes? Can we talk? For me, it's a quick feedback mechanism to explain to the person what I'm seeing, get his insights as well, and agree on an action item and what I can support with. If you're working on an Agile team, you need to have this quick feedback mechanisms as well, because you won't have enough time to, you don't have the entire year or the entire 6 months to deliver a product. You need to provide those feedback as fast as possible. Sometimes sprint retrospectives every 2 weeks could be too long to wait. So sometimes you just have to have a huddle, talk about what's causing the problem, and do a solution right then and there. So again, you're the culture. This is important. You're the culture, model the behavior you want to see. Because otherwise, if you don't show yourself to work and try to be the best person that you can be working with your Agile teams, and be Agile on your habits as well, then it's not going to work anymore. So best practices are past practices, guys. What you want to do is to iterate on a lot of the practices that you have, and don't look out for best practices outside. Your environment is unique to everyone else, simply because you have a different set of people, different set of deliverables, different set of market, different set of product backlogs and processes. So you have to tailor fit each of these product frameworks or Agile frameworks or UX framework, whatever it is, to your own unique context. And do that through experimenting. How do we experiment? Then maybe your one action item every retrospective. Let's focus on trying to solve that within that entire sprint. Not coming up with action item ahead, but getting everyone to contribute how we can solve that within the sprint. And have a daily stand-up around that as well. So you now have breakfast, lunch, merienda, dinner for your daily stand-ups. So last thing for product managers here, especially, and for the product teams that we have here, it's not about the first mover advantage. It doesn't make sense if you build products fast enough. You have to also be fast learners. Validate it with your users as fast as you can. Agile is not that framework. It's lean startup maybe, it's lean UX maybe, it's service design maybe, or something else. But definitely not Agile, just Agile. You have to look at other frameworks to complement that with what you're doing so far. So the question I leave you today is, what is your iterative learning strategy rather than iterative product delivery? I'm open for questions on anything Agile at all. Scrum, Agile, Kanban, whatever it is that you're having. Have you guys written down any problems at all? Or I'm sure you came in here with a problem. I'll probably take it 5 minutes, and then we can do like open space or Fishbowl. Right. Any questions on Agile or Scrum? You're going to give offense. Oh. I thought he was going to speak. Any questions, guys? Yeah.
What was your motivation for doing like 3 daily stand-ups?
What was our motivation for 3 daily stand-ups? We're not communicating. We're not communicating enough. So we have to come up with a ceremony that everyone agrees to, just to force that talking daily. And then we know that after 2 weeks or 4 weeks, we're going to ditch that entire practice. So that's the motivation. For us, the end justifies the means. Of course, don't tell that to the government. It's a different story. Yeah?
Just 15 minutes every
good question. In Scrum, we have a time box, right? 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And then finish or not finish, pass your papers after 15 minutes. We don't use the entire 15 minutes. Sometimes we just do like 5 minutes or 10 minutes based on where we are at the moment. Sometimes it becomes a huddle, it becomes longer, but then it's just within like 10 minutes max for each of the practices. Sometimes at the end of the day, it's just about syncing up that, hey, okay, we're done with this, tomorrow we have to, first thing, anyone who comes in first, do this. Did I answer your questions, guys? All right. Any other questions? Yeah.
Product manager related question would be, you said focus ruthlessly on the outcomes, but at some point, like that makes sense when you have limited runway, like what you said earlier. Like if you don't hit this, wala nang team next month, so it doesn't matter.
Right.
But you reach a point when you actually can miss outcomes, and it's okay because you want to build better practices, or you want to improve your architecture, you want to deliver faster by doing. So, from a product point of view, like as product owner or product manager, how do you draw the line and say that, you know, yeah, we're at the point na we can slow down so we can, you know, fix all of the hacks that we did so that we make it to month number 7.
Right. So I guess you also have to understand your entire context. Maybe your outcome is just deliver it on this date.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you want to make sure that you're building the right stuff underneath. Like for us in the current bank, we have to make sure our architecture is solid. Otherwise, you know, any delay, any failure on the bank's perspective is unforgivable. Now, even if we have an outcome of like X months, we need to deliver something, that's something that we cannot, you know, compromise. We'll have to work on that and have to, again, go back to our management sponsors to say, you know what, we have to push back on certain schedules because of this. And then we're doing it right now, so we don't have to postpone that later on.
Yeah.
So in terms of drawing the line, it's always, you know, a conscious decision every day. As product managers, one thing that I usually focus on with product managers or product owners I coach is that, are they clear what they stand on? What's the best principles they stand on rather than the best practices? Because if they don't have clarity on what they want out of it, then it's a different conversation I need to be having with them. If they're firmly solid, standing on what outcomes do they want out of this product, not just a date, then, you know, it's easier to make those trade-offs. You have to know where you stand. Not on the outcomes perspective, the dates, but the principles you're also working with. So we don't compromise for quality, for example, and that's a standard for each and every one within the bank.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You mentioned about the project you delivered for 3 months.
Yeah.
And then
Failed miserably.
Yeah. Actually, that's my question. So, who decided that it failed miserably? Was it based on business failure or delivery failure?
All right.
Both?
So here's the backstory after the 3 months. So after 3 months, we realized we're only selling, I think, 200 to 300 Aussie dollars after the first month. And then during the first month, when we were seeing the trend already that it's not selling, the founders went to somewhere in South Africa and worked with publishers, asking them what they want out of this platform. Apparently, the publishers wanted targeted topics, not anything that you just upload, you know, like someone peeing on the streets or like a big dog lying around. So they tested that, and then they realized they were starting out on a bad solution in the first place. They're solving the wrong problem. So on that perspective, you know, we all announced to the entire group, we failed on the first month, but we've learned using this new experiment, and we'll do this more carefully by testing out every 2 weeks. Not testing out just internally and the CEO, testing out to the publishers and to the customers, the newscasters as well. So it was a metrics based in terms of failure. It's also about engagement based. So a lot of different metrics would tell us we failed. Did that answer your question? Do you have any follow-up?
Yeah, I'm not convinced though that it was a failure in the sense that somehow if the specifications or the original intent, as you mentioned, was achieved, and I think that's really some of the vagueness when it comes to these kinds of
Correct. Yeah.
Because you know that you were able to build it, and you know that it was something that was based on the things that you guys agreed on.
Yeah.
So business failed actually more than the platform failed.
Well, we failed as a group. Because, you know, even if, for example, you call up Globe and Globe tells you, you know what, the sales team has been working on it, but it's the back-end system that's failing us, you just blame Globe.
Yeah.
I encountered that, by the way, just 2 weeks ago.
Not a question, but
Right.
just to counter a bit.
Yeah.
what Ian was saying a while ago was really instructive. That we are all in a product team, so it's not a business team or a development team. It's all a product. So if the developers created a fantastic software, but no one's using it, it's still a failure, regardless of what happened to it. Even if it's the greatest software. This is what we were talking about kasi the first last generation of building the right thing. If the product is not answering a specific problem, then it's not going to succeed. And then when you build a specific product, even before you build the product, you should already have the metrics on how you will define the success of that product. And if you're not doing that from the start, then you're not doing the job right. You have to set the metrics first, regardless of whatever metrics you want to set. And then you calibrate best based if you're reaching the actual metrics.
I think I'm coming off from the fact that software developers are not building anything that they want. It's something that's actually determined by someone, product owner, product manager, and so there is this synergy of sorts.
Yeah, so I get that, but at the same time, the perfect analogy that I read before that I always follow is a software development team, including the product manager and including the product owner. It's like a basketball team. So your point guards are your software your players actually are software developers. Your coach might be the product manager, the Scrum master, and the GM is whoever is the CEO or the thing. Whatever happens, even if they played like 30 games and they all won, but they still didn't make the playoff, the entire season still lost for everyone. So that's really just how I play.
Actually, that's my point, because when you talk about a game that you lost, that's a game. But if you're in a league, you're essentially learning from that experience. Yeah. That's why
this is actually sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this is an excellent point. One thing that we're trying to talk about moving forward is not the concept of failure, because you can talk about failing fast, but at the same time it's actually learning fast. And I guess what you're driving at is, even if we fail, maybe the business failed us, but at the same time it's not a failure after all. You charge it to experience and you move on from that, learning everything from there. And we succeeded after that, so it's essentially not a failure at all, but more like an experiment.
Right.
Yeah. Although at the same time, we feel like we've known this earlier on, like a month after we've been building it. Seems like we need to test it right away, but no one pushed so hard because everyone's afraid of the CEO.
Okay. Yeah.
So we all failed in that sense as well. All good?
All good.
Thank you. Other questions? Yeah.
I assume you are using communication tools like Slack. Why is it enough for the team? Why do you have? Why conduct 3 different stand-up meetings and not do it online?
Any thoughts?
Depends on your people. It really depends on your people. Like I use personally Basecamp a lot, and I like the fact that Basecamp allows you to write a lot of things and communicate via Basecamp. But not all of your developers are good writers.
Yeah.
And not all of your developers are expressive writers. Some of your most talkative developers don't like to write. So it really depends on the people.
And sometimes not everyone reads as well. That's painful. See, I'm not answering the questions. I just bounce it away. Other questions that you have? Right.
Was the 3 stand up for 3 different teams or same team, not one?
Just one team. So we wanted to make it painful for us, to be honest, because we're not communicating enough. We said, you know what, as a commitment, this is a group's perspective, by the way. It was not mandated by the coach, not by the product owner. They said, we learned from, because we had, just a week before that, we started the daily stand-up. Someone flew in from other countries, and then they help assist this team on some microservices and components. But then what they're doing is, since they only have a week, they started doing 3 stand-ups per day so that they can iterate fast. Now, that team was part of the group that had that hackathon with the group from other countries. They said, you know what, it works really well for us because we're ruthlessly trying to deliver something every day. Let's try it out. So that's an experiment. I'm not saying it will succeed. I'm just saying that it's an experiment that they agreed to run so that they can get to an outcome that they wanted to do. Like every day they deliver something, or at least they uncover everything that's blocking the team. So far, it's been working. I'm quite proud of this group because they're the ones that are very conscious on what they're currently developing right now.
We did for Standups a day.
Wow.
No, but it's for different teams.
Okay.
So each team would have stand-up. So we can do a web, Android, and iOS development. More on what each team has accomplished and what are the backgrounds that they're encountering. It's more because since it's 4 teams and each team has around 4 people, that would be around 20 people for the whole team. And if we'll just have one stand-up for the whole team, it takes a lot of time. That's why we broke it down to 4.
I guess my comment there is, we all should suspend judgment on that context simply because it may have worked for them. But then the question that we may have for your team, whatever practices you have, and this applies to everyone, not just his example, is that are we deliberately and intentionally doing things to learn from it, and then revisiting that after maybe a week or 2 to discuss, is this working for us or not? And then whether we like doing this, should we continue this or iterate or pivot? So you treat your process as a product as well. You try to iterate on that, you try to experiment, get data, decide after. So that's my only comment on that. I think the stand-ups is quite a hot topic. Like having 3 stand-ups. I think I was crucified in Facebook as well.
Another one.
Yeah.
Have you handled a remote team, and can Agile be used for remote teams?
So, I think so. I mean, anyone has worked with remote teams before? Yeah? I guess here's the thing. My opinion, and I like to get inputs from those who have also worked with remote teams. I think we think of Agile as a destination. It's like we get to a certain state where, wow, we're Agile. But to me, Agile is a spectrum. It's like what do you call asymptote? It's like an asymptote in your graph. You'll never reach the line. You just approximate it every time, but you never reach the line. That's Agile for me. You can try to approximate reaching the line, but you'll never get there. The real question is, how can we be more Agile tomorrow or today, based from what we currently have yesterday? So my answer to that is, it depends. Like a consultant answering, it depends. It depends. Pay me so that we can talk. No, just kidding. So it depends. I mean, some remote teams work really well because, like for example, in Oxygen Ventures, we fly people in. Sometimes people fly to Australia as well, just to make sure the collaboration and closeness is there. So to us, it's not about like physical closeness; it's also about like psychological closeness. So maybe that could work. And then you have to have a lot of tools. That's the thing. Lots of tools.
If I may add,
yeah.
We implemented webcams for our stand-ups. So essentially, let's say we're working on Australia team. So we're on the same time zone, and then we did stand-ups, even if they were like in a different part of the region. When we do it in UK, usually we also have that webcam. So I think it's really more of the communication, as you said. It's not really the proximity, but rather the communication piece that really needs to be worked on.
Any thoughts? Yeah.
Yep. No, I was gonna ask a question.
All right. Did we answer your question? Okay, thank you.
So what's the best way to do user testing when Agile? Because like, for example, you have to deploy something every 2 weeks, then you need feedback on it. So what are the best practices for that when you conduct user testing?
That triggered best practices. There are no best practices.
Okay, sorry, that best.
Yeah,
best
but I get your
practices,
point. Yeah. User testing. Sam, you're from UX. You wanna pitch in?
No, I'm still learning on that part. So
You won't comment yet. Okay. For maybe maybe you don't even have to think of 2 weeks. Maybe in a week's time you build something, go out, test it with the user, get out of the building, like what Dean Startup says. You get feedback right away. Now, if you really have to do user testing, there are lots of means to do that, like recruit people to come in every 2 weeks. I think Globe has a customer, you call that, like a community of their customers that they bring in every now and then to test their products. Sometimes you can use web platforms that can deploy to multiple users that fits your market. Is that what you're trying to ask? Yeah.
If I may, what I do is I have this different process with, compared to my development team. So my development team has this set of features that they do every 2 weeks, right? So as for me, mine is advanced by a sprint. So for example, this team is working on an events feature. Then I'll be working on a feature that's something that they will develop in the future. So I do it in advance, so I could gather more feedback. Then before it gets to them, I already validated it. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Yeah, one more question and then let's do a fishbowl. Or maybe let's use this moment as a fishbowl. Have you guys experienced fishbowl before? No? Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3 questions. What we do is, I would like to invite people to come up front and maybe respond to the questions. So I'll sit here, Yana is here, so you sit here. Let's start. I want you guys to also respond to it, because everyone's an expert on something. You're part of this. So, right, question?
Let's start with it's not really more a scenario that happened to us a few years back. There was a deadline, so 3 months deadline to create a product, a stable product. Bonus said it would be a stable product that can be shipped to the client. So what we did, we were able to finish the product within 3 months, but there were a lot, let's say a month's worth of bugs, and those bugs are just won't be encountered for if the product is used according to specification. So we intentionally, it was my decision, intentionally not fix those bugs, because what we think is it won't be encountered by the user. So when we ship the product, when a week before the deadline, we informed our CEO about it, and then he looked at our Jira and saw all the bugs that were needed, that we did not mention. We defended that the bugs were not easily reproducible, but then we got a lot of us got laid off because of that. So I want to hear your comments of what we did, if we did what was right. It was really.
Come here, Joshua. You have something. Go ahead.
I have an experience just yesterday.
All right, guys. So the fishbowl works this way. We need to reserve 1 seat here, and then anyone who wants to speak, you go in front. Please try to hear as well.
Okay, so the question basically is, we ignored a lot of bugs because it's not the main outcome. It's outside the user and outside the main user thing. I actually follow this principle a lot. The principle is called, if you want to build a great product, you should be able to ignore the fires. So that's basically it. But the corresponding principle that's attached to it, and I failed this just this week because I had the same conversation yesterday, is if you ignore the fires, you should also tell your boss that you're ignoring the fires, like way beforehand, not at the time that you're gonna release already. Because if you have a reasonable person that you're working with, and we tend to believe that the people that we're working for are mostly reasonable, they would understand why you're ignoring these bugs. But if you tell these guys a week before you're releasing that you have 50 bugs that you haven't told him before, that's a different conversation. So that's really what I'm getting from that. But don't worry, we all experience it.
Anyone who wants to respond as well?
So I think it's more of like
okay, yeah.
So,
you can stay there, Joshua.
So from our experience, yeah, we saw quite a few, not too much, but few bugs while we're building the product, but we actually communicate that to our boss, to our CTO, and
he's Vic from First Circle.
Oh, yeah, I'm Vic from First Circle. So we communicate that, and if it's not like, it's going to be like special case bug, or maybe user won't actually go through that, then we communicate that, and then we agree, okay, I think we can part this off and then just continue building. But if we think that quite a few users, or with the research that we're doing, users will encounter that, then we need to fix that. And then what we do is that we build the MVP of the product, and then we go back. We actually give time to fix the bugs, especially if it's important. And then we have like QA who does the regression testing and make sure that the majority of users not perfect, but somehow it's smooth. So yeah, basically that's it for the communication. Don't tell your boss like a week or a day before.
We're actually not planning to learn our boss about the list of bugs. Just a week before he was the one who checked the
All right, other questions, guys? Yeah.
I like to.
You want to respond? Yeah. Yeah. You introduce yourself.
Okay. Alright. So you have to remember that we have this product management. Management always is something that needs certain level of transparency and negotiation. So I think that's where most of us lack in terms of management. So in most cases, we always dealt the fire with this already, to the point that it's not, it could not be put off or something. So that's why in one of the values that we have in Agile talks about really certain level of transparency and negotiation between teams, stakeholders, and the management. So as product managers, we have that type of managers because we manage the product as a whole. So we always have to find that right balance, transparency and negotiation. That's it.
We were transparent to all the teams except the stakeholders. Everyone knew that there's bugs. It was agreed that both teams.
So I think you're building something on your team, not on the...
Sorry, this one?
Why not to the stakeholders? To the people who it matters to the most. Why is it them who was decided to be left out of the transparency?
We won't be able to get the deadline. It's our deadline, and we already know that those bugs were not be visible to the clients.
I have a question for the group. Does everyone understand psychological safety? What it entails?
Yeah.
That you won't get fired.
Yeah, exactly. Because I've been to your position numerous times. And the main issue really is that you're super afraid of what the stakeholder is going to say. Like, they're going to judge you that you're failing and everything, that because of all of these bugs, even if they're not your fault, even if your developer just suddenly left, it's still your fault, basically, you think. But, yeah, I think it's also, as product managers, I think it's also within our responsibility to promote psychological safety and get psychological safety for our entire team. Because that was the one in the Google thing.
And Sam, you have a question? Other questions, guys? Yeah, your question?
Directed to our product managers, jumping off what Josh said, is how do you help build that safety with the teams that you're working with? Because it's really nice to say that, yeah, I'd like to be able to do that, right?
So one of the big things that
sorry, making standups.
And then, by the way, anyone who wants to respond, please take a seat as well.
So
nice to hear from you.
So the big thing that I really do is that I really try to shield. Maybe this is wrong, maybe this is right, but tell me, especially the developers, tell me if I'm doing this correctly. But what I try to do is I don't let my developers directly be in a meeting where the stakeholder is pushing me a lot of negative things. Because for me, I need to be able to filter it into digestible and workable actual feedback rather than, because I've been working with a lot of different stakeholders, and some stakeholders will tell you, we'll talk for like 30 minutes, but like only 5 minutes is usable. So I try to first absorb everything, and once I absorb everything, I digest it and try to figure out the feedback and then give it to the developers. And at the same time, what I've learned is, and I learned it the hard way, is I always try to talk to the developers personally, and I also talk to them, really just try to talk to them, regardless of whatever level. Because our developers some of them are really, really good, came from UP, etc. Some are not so good, came from super not so good school. But regardless of, I'm so sorry.
Others, man. Thank you for not saying my school.
My main point there is developers are different, especially the different backgrounds that they came from. So you cannot speak English to everyone, and you cannot talk about, I don't know, iPhone X or AirPods to everyone. But I learned you can talk about basketball to everyone. So, so there, just that. Oh, and basically the point of that is making sure that the developers know that you do have their back, whatever happens. Even if they fail, and then doing the 5-minute thing. Like, if they have a mistake, tell that immediately to them. Don't wait for like a week or 2 weeks. And especially don't let the stakeholder be the one to tell them the feedback. Because that will ruin the trust between you and the developer.
So I'll pitch in on the psychological safety. I think it's a condition of the environment. Now you need to grow, you need to nurture. And the stories that people tell feed in onto that. Because when people tell stories about, a boss that sanctioned someone because he did something that's totally not really reprehensible, then it becomes a story that feeds into the culture. But one thing I want you guys to think about, because we're all leaders here. The moment you guys are here today, it's because you want to be leaders, or you're already a leader on your own right. You are a reflection of your boss. And you also reflect others, or you're reflective to others on your behavior as well. So when I say that, you have to be mindful about facilitating psychological safety. Because when you tolerate certain behavior, even if it is your boss, then you're becoming part of that system that you're trying to prevent. So why I'm saying that, a lot of the engagements I have, it involves me coaching a person directly that, hey, don't allow yourself to be belittled by your boss, by a colleague, by someone else. You have to stand your ground, explain your side, not necessarily defend yourself and push back, but at least express your interest. Because the moment we don't allow people to express their interest and create that pool of meaning, where people have all their shared values and shared thoughts and emotions and everything else out on the table, then psychological safety goes down. That's why there needs to be someone, and I think it's the top leader in the organization, who needs to nurture psychological safety. If that's not happening, demand it. Raise your standards. Because otherwise, you're just going to be part of that system. Are you part of the problem, or are you part of the solution? So just ask yourself those questions as well. Because you're all part of it. Anyone who wants to chip in as well?
Can I?
Yeah.
All right. Psychological safety.
I will leave.
What part of the reds?
One of the things that you want to, as you mentioned, you want to build as your part of the leadership. I'm head of digital in the organization that we're part of. By the way, we're recruiting. What I wanted to say is that you have to be able to get people to talk. This is a recurring theme for us. They have to be brutally honest with you, and sometimes you have to be brutally honest with them. And this culture that you build is is anchored on the fact that you guys can communicate. And contrary to what you just said, that you want to collate everything and then you speak for them, I do it differently. I'd like them to speak out, and sometimes you expose them so that they build their defenses, they build their capabilities instead of hiding behind you. And this is why it's kind of a risk to expose them, because some of them are not, especially, you mentioned about developers that are really good, but they're really quite silent. And then there are some who are not really good, and they're just full of fluff. They just talk, but they don't really know anything. So you need to be able to distinguish one from the other and get the team to complement each other. So there's a culture of communication that you need to build as a leader. You also have to have that sort of brutally honest relationship with each other and not be afraid that you'll get hurt and they get hurt, because you're part of it. And somehow I feel, I felt what he was trying to say to be something of a responsibility for us leaders to make sure that your developer, your weakest developer, feels that he's among the trees, and he doesn't feel like I'm the weakest chain, weakest link in the chain. I think once you start creating that culture wherein everybody's empowered, and I think the term for Agile is that you guys are self-organizing. You mentioned earlier about no Scrum Master. That's when you know that the team is already self-organized and they can actually pick up anything from anyone who left off. So I think that's what I wanted to share. And it's a continuous process for us in our team so that everyone feels that they are very much qualified to answer anyone who challenges whatever is being built. I'm going to sit down there.
Any other thoughts on psychological safety?
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
You have to sit. You have to sit there.
So I'm Dino, and Ian brought up the book Radical Candor, and I think that's been a Bible for me. It really talks about two main things which I think connect to psychological safety, and the framework is just basically you challenge directly and care personally.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's so I think in one way to encourage communication, there's the care personally aspect where you get to know your developers, but not just developers, your QA, your UX team, if it's a full stack team, but really trying to understand where they're coming from, how their families are. There's the soft side, but not also forgetting the other side in which you really need to get things done, to challenge directly. And there are also, so that book, it inspired me a lot. No? Since as leaders, there's also a certain profiling that happens during when you take care of a certain group. So I talked also about two types of people you want to keep in the team: rock stars and superstars. Wherein rock stars are people who are culture carriers of the organization, so they're rocks, they're foundations. But also they're superstars who want to really achieve something. So parang also being mindful of that type of profiling for your developers, for the QAs that you handle, will also be very important. So I like this discussion because my background is psychology. It's also interesting that all of these got brought up. So
Thanks. You can stay there.
You take my seat.
My name's Jarvi. So I think there's like a, I think in a team, like people mention like culture. I think again, like one of the more important things in culture is like to set like a base level of trust. Because I think like everyone wants the team to succeed. Everyone wants like the product to be shipped, or like everyone wants everything to go well. But like along the way, like when people get stressed out, communication can't like happen like in the most ideal way. Like you can't like when you're stressed out, or when you're when you're under pressure, like you're not like some people just communicate very direct. Like people have different communication styles, so you're not able to like think about all these other factors along the way. Sometimes you just want to get your point across. But I think that having a base level of trust that you mean well and you don't like take things personally is like important for a team. Just some thoughts.
It's a hot topic, psychological safety. Yeah. Any questions? Any more thoughts? Yeah.
Regarding communicating with the team. So I was a dev previously, and devs, when they're working, they don't want to be disturbed. They don't want to talk. They just want to finish everything. So if you want to communicate, do we do that in a official manner, set a appointment, or how do we need to focus on how to communicate with them? How do you do communication with the team?
So calling all developers to come off.
It's the same question I have in mind.
All right. You want to say something?
This is the same problem I have.
I guess I'll jump in on this.
Alright, here's another developer.
Okay, coming from both sides of the fences, because I was a developer and now I manage teams. So it is a constant problem for me. It used to be a constant problem for me as well. But what I found worked for the teams that I work with is I make it explicit that, okay guys, I'm gonna do my best to block off these hours for you because I know these are the times that you're productive. So let's say, I know that after lunch everybody gets in the zone. So I'm gonna do everything I can so that nobody disturbs you during the zone time. But the hours before that, in the morning, when everybody's still, eating breakfast or, just reading documents or whatever, this is a good time for us to catch up and talk and make sure that, at the very minimum, we're gonna have meaningful conversations at least once a day. And if we don't talk because you're in the zone and, people are gonna go home or whatever, that's fine. But then I make it clear that, this time in the morning, the golden time that we're gonna talk, we better make the most out of it. So coming to that agreement with my teams na, I'll play goalie so you guys don't get distracted, but at the same time, be present when we're gonna talk. So it's not just the frequency, but I focused on the quality of the time that we have and the types of talks that we have with each other. Kasi the worst case is, may blocker sila ng 1:01 p.m. They don't want to talk to anyone. I'll find out the next day. I lost one day. That's the worst case that is going to happen. And it almost never happens. So, that's what I do. Now I feel...
Semi-formal, not the formal talks that is scheduled. So it's mostly to talk to someone who's there, who's available, or...
We reserve a room for stand-up. Just so, but we always have a place and we do it at the same place. So, yun na yung formality niya. But all of that is agreed upon by the team. So if they want to move it, it's their call, not mine. Now I'm gonna sit down because I feel awkward sitting in front.
Alright, I'll just pitch in on coming from the other side, who always disturbs developers. I think it's also about prioritizing what you disturb them with. Because sometimes, we bug them and ask them random things, or ask them about things that you could ask later on. I think what worked for me is to pull things, like put it on a post-it and just wait for a time when the developer is ready to have that discussion, usually during breaks or over lunch. Then I start going to that person and asking the questions I have. So for us who bugs developers a lot, we have to prioritize as well what kinds of conversations you want to have with them. Because I think not everyone will mind naman na you're bugging them. But if they get bugged with something trivial, like LeBron James fouling out or whatever, then it's not gonna be worth it. So it's probably something about prioritizing as well, what questions we ask. Anyone else wants to pitch in? So coming from both sides of the fence as well?
Coming from all sides of the fence. Sorry. So I'm still a developer right now. I spend about 2 to 3 days a month doing software now. If I'm writing code, maybe. I don't want to talk to anyone else. But if I'm building software, definitely I would want to talk to some people now. Probably, because software development is a team sport there. So you can't just do it on your own. Ikaw yung bako dun sa basketball, basically. That's the case now. But I'd probably talk to the people, the team that I'm working with on what we're building together. So that gives you context for that one. Yeah. And maybe it's also the reason why we think developers can communicate. Say they tend to not try to communicate. But that's my perspective.
Yeah. Just stay here.
I'm Mark from BGW. The way I see it, I think it's the word buy-in. So we have like internal and external stakeholders, right? Internal is your team, basically. So they have to have a buy-in. That they should understand that they're part of an organization that's doing something. They're practicing certain practices or processes. They have to have a buy-in on that also. They also have to have a buy-in on what they're trying to achieve. For the external stakeholders, like the boss or the client, they have to also understand that this team's doing Agile or waterfall or whatever process that they agreed on to, sorry, too much coffee, to get that product delivered. So they won't have any miscommunications. It can establish expectations. For example, the boss that found out too late, if he was invited, if he's invited to the sprint review every 2 weeks, he would have known from the start what's happening, and he could have adjusted his expectations and probably the deadline. So basically, it's more on the buy-in of the internal and external stakeholders.
It's awkward. Hi, I'm Sam. It's my first time here. Okay, so just a bit of my background. I'm a designer and a developer. So this is coming from the developer side of things. I guess one of the key things about talking to developers is really become observant of your developers. One thing that I observe is that if they are in earphones, don't ever talk to them, because that's when they are in the zone. Plus, and you'll know when the code editor is there or when YouTube is there, and that's when you can talk to them. It's okay in our office, because there are times that developers are in the zone, and sometimes it's more than 3 hours that they're coding just for, I don't know, 6 lines of code that they thought of. Then, but hey, that's good. Then, when after that zone, they will have this cool down. They will always have that cool down, and that's when you can get to talk to them. But in our team, we have our stand-up scheduled at the start of the day, which is 2 o'clock. We're mid-shift, by the way. So it starts at 2 o'clock. Then that's when we know what people are doing. So at least from there, we don't have to ask, hey, what are you doing? At least that saves us that trivial question. But there are also times that developers want to be bugged, actually. This is where pair programming comes in, where they just want someone to talk to, like a rubber ducky or a person. And yeah, it actually happens that people are just like, oh, they solved something just because they talked to someone. And that's something that they haven't been solving for the whole day. So yeah, developers are really, I don't know, sensitive species. I'm a developer too. I'm a sensitive species. So yeah, you really have to be observant of what they're working on, what's on their screen, if they have earphones on, and yeah, that's all I can say. Thanks.
Actually, coming from both sides as well. So I'm doing like a little bit of programming as well, but mostly doing product management. So what works for me or effective is that I like the what you shared, knowing personally your developers, because I can feel them. So I know what works for them. So that way I know when to communicate. Then what I do, what works for me is that every day we do like a catch up every morning, and then we are clear on what we need to do. The jobs needs to be done, and then at the end of the day we catch up again, or we're able to like achieve the goals and what you want to what's your suggestion? So we somehow encourage them to like talk. So I guess really is we need to like add it has to have like a personal care to your team. So and somehow that's also like protection for them. So yeah, some developers don't want to be bugged, especially if they're doing coding. But what I recommend to them is that so that you the thoughts in your mind won't it won't get lost. You need to write down what you need to like do. Need to like pseudocode or just write down in sentences or like summary of what needs to be done, so that if you're back down, then you can just go back straight away to what needs to be done. So somehow some of them work, it works, but somehow you just need to like study or be observant of your developers or your teams.
Yeah.
Sorry, so my name is
Just go in front, guys.
So I'm Leif. I'm a developer. So not really a product guy yet. No, so don't manage team yet. So I'm speaking purely as a developer.
First of all, product guy. It's okay.
First of all, I agree with Sam. When you see a developer with earphones, don't talk to them. When you see a developer with earphones and they're hooked up, don't even look at them.
Yes.
That's how you know that's how you know that the developer wants all their sensory inputs blocked out and just want to focus on code. Also, another thing that I think really helps in communicating with developers while they're working is aside from thinking of when to bug them and to disturb them, you have to think about what you want to tell them. So if you're telling them something that's value adding to them, they want you to tell them. They want you to let them know that as soon as possible. But if it's something like that definitely can wait till tomorrow or till an hour later, tell that to the developer an hour later. So something value added would be something urgent maybe. Like a bug just popped up, we might encounter it soon, or the back end structure just changed. We might encounter problems doing that in your code. So these are things that managers are aware of, that developers have to be aware of immediately. Something that could wait, probably, hey, we have a new feature coming up next week. Just telling you now. Don't. As a developer, I would rather you just tell me that during our stand-up maybe. So that's when my mind's focused on the plan for the week rather than you tell me now. I'm just gonna forget what you just told me because my train of thought is focused solely on developing what we're doing for this sprint, and for the next sprint. Just give me that information during a stand-up or during the retrospective, right, or during the sprint planning. I'm totally fine. We discuss a lot, but don't disturb me about things that definitely can wait. You would know naman eh. Like imagine you put yourselves in the shoes of the developer. Do you want to be bugged by this information right now, or can it wait like 5 minutes or 1 hour? And usually developers are very open to discussing because it's their baby that they're giving to you. It's their blood and sweat. So they want it to be the best as they can be. Just that it's not all the time they can communicate with you when they're focused on taking care of their baby, right?
Can I share a funny story? Yeah. As long as you're in front, it's funny.
Sorry, I just remember to say. Because I find it interesting that every time I put earphones when I'm coding, I shut down. I like fall asleep. So I found that really weird because a lot of people put on earphones and they work. So sometimes I put earphones without using one for it. And remember, 2 colleagues of mine, they were working together. So one of them was really noisy. As in yung parang kept on talking while you're coding. So partner goes like, "Can you shut up? I can't think." Sabi niya, if I shut up, I won't be able to think. So that's probably the difference between an introvert and an extrovert. So maybe they shouldn't be working together. So that's the funny story.
Thanks for the story.
So maybe I'm an introvert because I shut down.
We have a next question.
Well, I have a technical question. I guess we're in the process of thinking about how to create and I guess a team. But have you guys have had experience na DevOps is part of a full stack team. They're part of the sprint planning, they're part of the daily stand-ups. Can you talk to us about that process? Normally that's where the communication comes out within our team. The developers are ready, pero they need to request certain changes from DevOps. Not sure if people have DevOps, but you request changes from DevOps, and then DevOps is work from home. Those small things that crop up, and then we normally lose a day waiting for DevOps to execute certain things. I'm not sure about that, about DevOps being part of sprint, about experience ng San, if anyone has that type.
So I guess from one thing though, so DevOps is, I guess you're referring to like a guy who creates the the deployment packages, and we involve them on a daily basis in the Scrum of Scrums. So our Scrum of Scrums is a technical Scrum of Scrum where the tech leads and the squad leads of each of the squads get together and talk about technical matters. And that's where the DevOps guy, at this point it's a lead. He sort of like gets in all the input from everyone. What problems do you have with the platform? Is there anything that we can change for you so that you can deploy faster? So it happens on a daily basis. Not everyone from the DevOps team, I really cringe when I say DevOps, DevOps team, because DevOps is actually a culture, but then we now talk about it as a role. But then, just answering your question, they of course need to be integrated, they need to be informed as well, because otherwise they'll just be another silo, which we are trying to prevent with Agile. Diba? So if you have a separate team that's doing just DevOps work, that's fine, but at the same time, if that's your context, that's okay as long as you have interaction points regularly, and then you make sure you open that space for anyone from the team to go to the DevOps guys, and DevOps guys go to anyone from the team. That's at least my experience with DevOps. Anyone who wants to share?
I'm not really sure if it's a good advice, so.
Jen, good? You have to answer.
Yeah. Again, I'm not really sure if this is a good advice, because what we do is, as much as possible, there are more people who are involved in development. Even we don't really have, we do have a DevOps person, but we always make sure that all of our developers know how to deploy. Just in case there's something wrong, like for example a critical bug, there's always someone who has the keys to deploying it. So I'm not sure if it works for you, because there are developers who are really, what do you call this, like caged by their job description. So yeah, it depends on the developer if that's something that they want to learn. Yeah, we have this culture of, as much as possible, you get to touch some DevOps, even just deployment.
DevOps work, right? No DevOps guy. You get to touch the DevOps work.
Yeah.
Just clarifying that. I got disoriented for a bit. All right.
Well, we're open-minded.
But yeah, going back.
He gets touched every now and then.
Yeah, so like that's the as close to Holy Grail as you can get, where everybody on the development team can do deployments. I've worked on a team where we were pretty close to that. But one thing I really like with this thought space, when you think about Henrik Nieberg and his Spotify model, is that they started off with the DevOps team, but the goal of the DevOps team was to make each squad capable of deploying themselves. So their purpose was to build the pipeline where everybody can do the deployment and not do it themselves. And then they would eventually just, disperse and do other cool things. So for me, like trying to scale that holy grail of a small team to bigger teams, that's really how it would be cool to do it.
Can I just be a little bit more conservative? I'm from a financial industry, so we don't really allow our developers to commit to the branch and then eventually to prod. It's a really, really scary proposition, especially if the records, your client data is there. So essentially, we're not saying that it's wrong. It's just that probably depends on which industry you're part of. So I'm not saying that it's something not worth trying. Again, Spotify, I think what they did was they re-architected their platform so that any of the modules that are part of Spotify can be deployed without really getting a bunch of notifications. Probably if you track the number of notifications that they have on a particular date, that would be like more than 5, 6, 7, or 8. But again, the critical part there is that the architecture for Spotify was created in such a way that everyone of that team can deploy. But with banks, financials, and you probably can help me out on this, we're pretty much part of that no-fly zone area wherein you can only touch dev environments, maybe UAT to a certain extent, but never prod. It goes through a CAP process, and it's a sucky waterfall process, but it's something that we have to go through because people from above would often say, hey, this is very dangerous if you're going to set. And I think that's one of the questions that we have, because if you're talking about enterprise agility, that's why when I saw SAFE, it's something that they gravitate towards. Enterprise seems to like the complexity, not the simplicity, but probably because they want things safer. So
one not
from the word.
There. So yeah.
So I guess I agree with that actually. It depends on the risk profile of your company. That's why when I said earlier, Agile is really a contextual framework. You have to learn up to what point you can push it. Then maybe for this company, we can only get this far. Then for others, you can get farther than that. But essentially, it's asymptotic. You can never have an ideal state where it depends really on your risk profile, your leadership, your risk appetite. Risk again, always about risks.
I kind of disagree with that. So
no worries.
I'll go to.
Should I sit down?
Yeah. Okay. I kind of disagree with that because, like, one of the most mission critical things that we've done as human beings is plan space flight. Like, if you screw up there, someone dies, and literally dies. So, like, Apollo 1 was a disaster. So they were testing it out. Fire broke out. All the astronauts died in a test launch. So what they did was they rebuilt the entire thing, burned it again to find out what happened. And one of the learnings in manned spaceflight is that instead of really waiting for it, what they did was you develop something for half a day, and then you test it. Then you develop again, and you test it. So you shrunk the iterations to very, very short for that one. And I think yung sa financials, although I haven't really tried this yet, probably what you want to do is not to make big changes. Rather, you want to make really small changes.
Right.
Because even if you have a DevOps, how would that DevOps know that what you're doing will screw things up? You probably need like an expert developer to be able to tell you that. And if there's so many changes, it's probably better to make it. Yeah, it's probably better to make it recoverable. In one client that I work with, we built this system that validated production every few seconds. So it ran actual production transactions. But even if you deploy and you broke something, you would know in a few seconds. Kasi it would complain na we're hammering it with 500 transactions per second. Kami lang yun. Tapos na if you deploy something, it broke critical functionality, you would know already. So you could roll back. The reason why is I deployed something on Friday at 6:30 p.m. Then left the office. That was it. So in the Uber, half of it is not working now. So maybe that's the case now. Although I do agree that in regulated environments, you probably need that step until you're confident. I would just argue that not to call them DevOps. They're probably a sysad or
actually, we're trying to move outside that change board mindset. Again, it's really companies having this risk aversion, and which actually leads them to do things faster. And it's a bit of a challenge because you try explaining that to your boss, and probably your boss will tell you, "Go fuck yourself." And
In a nice way.
In a nice
corporate,
way, in a corporate
enterprisey way.
And then, although our boss is very open, but they have to deal with regional bosses and then corporate bosses. And then, when you talk about financial organization, it's really just this bureaucratic layer of things that you really want to have a champion somewhere in the middle or maybe somewhere at the top to make those changes. The reason why I mentioned, and I actually agree with you, I mean, we're not saying that you don't change things. It's actually a challenge for us leaders to always push it a little bit further. So, but yeah, I'm just trying to say that it's quite harder for us in the regulated industry because they would probably say there's a lot of business risks involved. But I think moving the dial a little bit is not really a bad thing. But if you have the clout, move it further.
I think also for product managers, and I've mentioned this to a couple of people that I work with. I prefer that developers fix issues in production if you wrote it, because that builds a culture that if I do shit, the shit blows up. I have to clean the shit up, basically. That's a lot of shit in one.
Blow it up.
Yeah, and blow it up. And then, but I think also that could be input to product managers to say that maybe you need to build this kind of functionality. Either a tool to really help you reconcile data or a tool to prevent further stuff. But again, if you try to isolate yourself from the reality of the production for it, which is not the intention of DevOps. A couple of years ago in the training, I met a lady who was the manager for DevOps. And she needs to get 2 managers to get promoted up. Because as a manager of DevOps, she handles the development and operations team. That's probably not correct DevOps. So the more that you shield it away, the less feedback that you get, which you could really help. And since this is product PH, that's where product managers come in. But yes, get the people.
Other questions?
Yeah. So recently the message of getting from our product owners that he wants to resign. It's no longer effective. I'm a Scrum Master, but I need several projects. He wants to resign because it's no longer effective in managing his stakeholder. Blah 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 blah. Thoughts? That's my question. What are your thoughts about it?
Managing stakeholders.
And he's right in telling me that it's not effective. It's not at all. He can make the final decisions. He can prioritize. He tells us one thing, and then the stakeholders will tell us one thing, and then he will tell us to follow what the stakeholders do. What should we do?
Guys, anyone hiring?
First question.
So, you want to go?
Sure. No, this was our topic last time. But I guess more to the point that general lang is. So the product manager role, product owner role within Scrum teams, it's not a job wherein it's going to be free for everyone. So anyone here who wants to be a product manager, you have to understand that you're going to have to manage a lot of stakeholders. You have to understand that a lot of times you're going to be the sounding board or like the shock absorber for the entire team. Because you're the ones who are talking directly to the product, to the stakeholder. You're the ones who are going to say that it's late. You're the ones who are going to say that this particular feature is not actually working. You're the one who's going to say that, sometimes, you're the one who's going to say that this developer just left, especially if it's remote. You're going to say, hey, this developer, I cannot contact him anymore. And he's not submitting code for like 1 week now. So there's a lot of stress involved in the job, much more than any job I've handled actually. And I've been with HR and operations manager, and now I'm product manager. So that's my first thing there. So if you're actually hiring for a product manager specifically, you'd really want someone who can handle stress or have handled stress and can handle people of different types of people. It's not good if you only have. It's not good if you have a product manager who can only handle bosses or executives, because that means they cannot talk to the devs. And it's not good if they can only talk to the devs, because that would mean that they're going to be pushed by the bosses. You'd want someone who can talk across the board. And maybe they can learn on the job, but if within the 6 months, kasi may regularization period naman. Within the 6 months,
thanks Philippine government.
Yeah. Within the 6 months, if you notice that the person is not able to communicate at one part of the job, either the developer or the boss, you'd have to give that feedback. And if they cannot learn, you're just creating problems for yourself in the future. Yeah, that's my take around there.
Quite because ever the development team, and we can just say, can you just replace him now? Because it's not being, I mean, syempre, it's not something. Tapos, I can be mean or harsh by, kunyari, sharing yung information na yun with me, parang, I can be harsh and say, okay, just replacing you. Parang ganun, di ba? Pwede, well, that's one way to think. Or another way is to, why? What's your difficulty? Parang, do you think you can improve or
so my answer kasi that specifically is not a product manager hat anymore, it's an HR hat. And the way I approach these things is very simple. Parang, first thing, do I really want this person gone? Because is this person actually not going to be performing the role in 6 months, in 1 year, and 2 years? And if I determine already that this person is not going to be able to perform, the next step I have is to basically lead him to the decision that he has to resign. And it shouldn't be a bad thing. It should be something wherein he's going to be realizing that, oh, there's like a really good future for me outside the company. Because no one wants to do a bad job. I really believe that. So if you lead someone to believe that they can actually, and this is through a lot of discussions, like, oh, what do you want of the future? Uy, ganda dyan eh. Play ka dyan. If you can, anyway, my point is that if the person is not working out, then maybe lead him to actually go somewhere else. The pain kasi is worse if the person stays.
Oh God.
For both.
Anyone hiring? Alright. I guess my answer to that goes back to the principles that you stand on. You as a coach and the product owner as a product owner. When I think about product owners or product managers, first thing that comes to my mind is ownership. If you don't own the product, get out of being a product manager. And that's important because you're the CEO of your product, sabi nga ni Ben Horowitz. If you cannot own that, and that means you wear multiple hats, HR, whatever that is, as long as you look at the outcomes of that product, if you're not prepared to do that, leave. Because you're just doing injustice to both the organization and to yourself. Now, as a coach, what I would suggest you to do is to challenge the person. This is something that you need to own. It's not something you have to get someone else to say yes to or whatever. Parang may inubod dito sa side na to. So it's about challenging them on what's your call. What's your decision. Usually what happens is product owners get decisions from multiple stakeholders, right? We all have stakeholders, that's fine. But if you cannot take that decision yourself and own it and go to your team and tell them this is what we have decided on, then you're not in the business of product management or product ownership. I use that interchangeably because you know yung term na PO proxy product owner. Like you're not really the product owner, you're just a proxy for stakeholders. I think it's a creation of people who just cannot handle product management, rather than that being a situation that's handed on to them. We allow, that's my point, we allow things to happen and then we start complaining about it. But then the first step we need to be doing is challenge that or maybe take on a different role altogether. So I would suggest you start getting him on a conversation or her on a conversation on what do you want to do in life? Those kinds of things. No, seriously. Because if she cannot handle the stress and own the entire product herself, then she's fit for a different job. It's not a bad thing. It's just a different contextual thing. So maybe just try to lead him to that conversation. If not, then ask him to leave.
Actually, the funny thing is it's not resigning from the company. Just wants to resign from that particular company that very difficult stakeholder because he wants to try another stakeholder and he thinks he might be effective with that.
First step yun actually.
So, but I understand that you're suggesting para as if
ba you'll be effective in an other stakeholder? Will you be able to do the job that you haven't been doing with your current stakeholders?
Your husband is gonna answer.
Alright, go ahead. Just to highlight what he said, like somehow it's helping him or her if you challenge him, or maybe like laid out what's the expectations of him or of her.
Actually, I did that already.
Yeah, if you did that, then you have like did or get some inputs as well from like somebody in the top management, and still he isn't able to like deliver. Then I think that's a trigger to.
And what he said that was already done as well.
Yeah, but if it's a matter of like because I wanted to do the other product, then I think that's not a good way to do it because he might actually do the same thing on the other product. So you need to like be clear. Okay, you're not delivering here, and how sure are you that if you switch another product, you can deliver?
Comment ko lang, gusto niya yung company niya. Ayaw niya lang naman naman. Pero gusto niya yung company.
Alam mo yung angle ko is more on the person in general. No? Kasi I remember a few years ago, I was in a situation I totally did not like. You wake up in the morning and it's like, fuck, what am I doing with my life? No? Tapos, but I couldn't easily leave. No? So parang, there's no agility in myself. So I can't say that, through this, I'm leaving or something. No? So, and that maybe is siguro something that's true for everyone. No? Kasi every time you take on leadership, no? Whether if you're a leader or you just lead people, no? It's always opening you to conflict. No? It's always making yourself more vulnerable. Kumbaga, no? And then when you are in that situation, you would want to be able to say no. You want to be able to move on. No? You want to make decisions that even if it's wrong or right, no? So even if it's right, you probably still get fired. Okay lang, no? Kasi parang I think connected to sa sinabi mo sa hiding the bugs, no? So there's a saying, diba? It's better to ask forgiveness than permission. Yung nga lang, di ba, pag nahuli ka, oops, sorry. Diba? Pero pag hindi ka nahuli, like, yeah, diba? Forget, no?
1 week na lang, nahuli ko eh.
Oh, yeah. 1 week na lang, di ba? Oh, can't you just type Facebook and not the Jira tracker, di ba? Pero kasi, parang you only get that confidence if parang you know you can survive it. Parang you fail fast eh. Parang you're able to fail fast if you can do it again, no? If you can't do it again, you'll be very, very cautious about what you do. So maybe it's just having that ability for yourself na, yeah, I'm the product owner, I should be doing this, I should be making the decisions. No? If you don't believe that as stakeholder and fire me, okay lang, it's your loss. But of course, getting there is a different question. It takes time to build that one. I know, I've done it before.
Do you have any other questions?
Maybe you can take a couple more.
Yeah.
Sure. As a team member, how do I influence those who do the decision making? Do I create this environment we're talking about, communicating, testing, learning, experiments?
Okay, interesting. Okay, so brief thing about my background. I applied for HR in my last company. But they didn't want me for HR. They said I'm too techy now for that. So they hired me as a product manager. But in order for me to get to that particular position, I had to influence them to become a product manager. But what I realized also is that there are different ways to influence. Me kasi, siguro hindi super obvious, but I'm very direct. I hurt a lot of people whenever I talk, especially a lot of teams. And but with my stakeholders, with my bosses, I very, very direct in the way I do it. So for me and how I influence specifically is I tell them specifically what they're doing. But that's not for everyone, because not everyone can communicate that way. Every person has a different way of how they communicate. Some people need to provide the actual validation of their idea first before they actually communicate, meaning they have to set examples on why these things are good. Some people have to be able to show someone how something works, or some people have different things. So I guess my main thing there is even before you talk about that, you have to figure out first how you communicate and how you can communicate well. And then, so mali pala ako. So that's the first thing. Second thing pala is, you have to also figure out how the recipient receives the message better. Because some people are visual, some people are listeners, some people do not want to be confronted. Some people, especially a lot of bosses, do not want to think that some people like to think that they came up with a solution. So you have to know yourself and you have to know your communicator, or the person you're communicating with. And then once you know that, that's the time that you actually bridge your solution to that particular thing. So that's my thing.
I'll just add to that, and maybe it's just being consistent on what you're hearing from me so far. I'm always about going back and looking at the mirror, reflecting back to you. So I think you always have to look you have to look into what can I do next so I can show them something new that could potentially inspire the culture to change. You won't change the culture yourself, but you might be able to change a few people that starts a movement. Medyo idealistic, pero I think if you don't have that courage to stand up and do it yourself, how can you demand it from others? So you have to start with yourself, and me first, us second. So, halimbawa, if you look at my background, sabi nga ni Joshua kanina, parang I started as a tester. I actually started as a customer service agent. No, mali. I actually started as a Counter-Strike professional.
That's the most accurate.
Sorry, CS ako eh. CS guy ako. So I played tournaments. I spent 10 years in college because of Counter-Strike. Suma 10 taon ako sa college. Pero I started that way. Pero kumbaga parang how did I get to testing? How did I get to being a manager, being a product manager, being an operations guy, being an agile coach? When I came from like 10 years in college, and my undergrad is actually political science, so it doesn't really make sense. But it's me always just trying to, okay, what's the next step for me? What's the next step for me? What's the next step for me? And then trying to just be courageous enough to test it out. If I get sanctioned, then sorry. I'm like better ask forgiveness than permission type of person. Pero I changed that way. And if I don't always reflect back on what my behaviors are so that I could change others, I wouldn't be able to create certain environments that I'm able to create today. So I guess, when we ask the question, how might we change others, we have to look back in the mirror and how might I change myself so I can help others to change as well. Sorry, medyo idealistic, but that's how I am. It's sort of like the board I stand on.
So basically it's the same idea as yung sinabi niya. So I'll just tell you a little story. So me and my team, 5 kami dun sa project. We came from the same company, then nag-exodus kami. Then lumipat kami in another company, then sama-sama kami dun. The thing with that previous company is that it's not really a feedback first environment. It's more of a, the usual tech bros environment where let's just do this shit and shit. So it's that kind of environment, and it's not the environment that I really want as a UX designer, because of course as a UX designer I want feedback first before we do shit. That's a lot of shit.
I know.
Yeah. I don't know, it just comes naturally. Anyway, so the thing is, so you have the same people on the same company. So it's a challenge to change the mindset of those same people. Then it's another challenge that we're in a bigger company now, which is like ×3 than where we previously went. So what I did is just, I'm a small person, but I tanked it. So I just did it. I just did more usability testing. Then that's when the developers actually saw that, hey, what I did was wrong. And they don't really see that if you don't do testing, right? So I just did the thing. Then eventually the developers actually have this feedback first mindset as well. Then it suddenly becomes contagious to other teams, because in that company we have 3 products and we're working on 1. Then the other teams are eventually seeing the effects of what
we did in our culture, in our small team, not necessarily the full company because that's really far-fetched. At least, yeah, you start small, and then when people see the effects on how positive it is, how negative it is, then people will eventually follow you. And yeah, and now, and you as someone who started the plague now has to, you'll eventually be on the other teams to at least facilitate the same thing that you did to the other team. So yeah, it suddenly becomes a culture. It becomes contagious. So yeah.
Maybe we can take one more question. Sorry, James.
Actually, I have one question that I'm really interested in for all of the product owners and managers that we have in the room. So a bit of context. I've worked with product owners na I see them during planning, and that's the only time I see them. And it worked. It worked. Not to knock on them. I've also worked with some na they want to talk to us every day. Parang just to keep in touch, na para to build that, para may constant feedback. And I've seen it work both ways. But personally, parang for you, like with your style or with your experience, what for you is the happy medium na gusto nyo when working with people?
So I really like this talk that I had with his boss, Tony, a couple of months ago. So my big thing is that I'm a product manager, but I really hate documentation. I hate it. But what I realize is that, and it took Tony for me to realize is that if you do a lot of documentation from the start, you're not gonna do a lot of interaction in terms of a daily thing if everything's documented. But at the same time, if you do not do a lot of documentation at the start, you're gonna have to invest in a lot of communication and daily thing. Personally, for me, I do believe that I'm not omniscient. I'm not gonna be able to figure out everything at the start. So I do the top line documentation and then the technologies and all that, some of the specifics, but there's a lot of things that are missing. And then I invest heavily on the day-to-day, and I keep myself always open. But that's just personally my style. I know there are other product managers who really like detailing everything first, and then just letting it, and then talking to everyone, then letting it run afterwards. So I guess it really depends on the organization and the product manager. But for me, especially if it's a super tight deadline and there's no lead time for you to document everything, yeah, every day. Any other product managers there?
Okay, ako having the team, no? So I prefer a product owner that just owns the product. So I prefer them just coming in sprint planning and then coming back in sprint review. This is a recent realization, no? Parang product owners kasi do two things, and they prioritize and they clarify. No? Between the two, requirement talaga yung prioritize. If you can't prioritize, you're not a product owner, basically. Clarification naman could be you can choose to really clarify everything, which is the overexcited product manager that will micromanage. Or you can choose not to do any clarification, which is, for example, no? I prefer that. No? The client I work with for a few days a month, no? He's really good in the business. So he knows that maybe this is what we focus on. Very details he doesn't really care about, because he has a business to run. No? So that means that product management falls into the team, no? More. No? And that's what I prefer as a team member, basically. Pero you can also probably see maturity of the team, no? Siguro sa umpisa, product owner would be more tight, no? Until maging confident siya with the team. No? Siguro an interesting discussion is, in the early days of Scrum now, one of the impediments that the Scrum Master protected the team from was the product owner.
Yes.
So parang, you see you start of the month, no? So you see you again, no? At the end of the month, no? Specifically because if you nandun yung concept, no? So that's what I honestly prefer, no? But no, if you think of it as a spectrum, then either one is okay. It just depends on how much. Maybe you don't like the document, no? So just put documentation to the team.
No.
Smart.
Our documentation are basically the decisions kasi.
Yeah.
Like on a daily basis, for example. Because my experience before is that I document a lot of things. And then down the line, we choose different technologies or different decisions. So the entire documentation goes to shit. And the decisions are the ones that actually matter. So I figured, hey, I'm just gonna document all the user stories, the things that we need to be able to do. And then from there, we talk about how to do it. And then along the way, as we're building the thing, I document it based on the decisions that we made. And then after the product is finished, you have the full documentation along with the build thing. That's my approach, but it's not the approach of everyone. Primarily, that was our approach because Ian didn't actually touch on something very specific a while ago. If your team is new and you're a product manager, you'd have to spend a lot of time with your team, regardless of how documented they are. But as the team matures, you would really be, you're gonna be stepping back, and a lot of your lead developers are the ones actually already clarifying a lot of things. And that's personally for me, it's gratifying when that happens. Yeah.
I can finally take a vacation.
Yeah.
Actually, in our team, that's also the way we do it, and somehow the team, not that I'm not doing so much work, but because I think if you like the very efficient way of influencing others is to like live the culture or like the values of the company. So the effective way of I like the way you said, wherein if hindi pa mature yung team, very new ka, and you're trying to establish a relationship with them, then you need to touch base with them every now and then, or if kaya daily. But if you think you're confident enough that they have matured, you have taught them on how to do things, somehow we can leave them, but don't leave them totally. So you still get in touch with them like at the end of the week. So I think that's the key. Like it's a matter of understanding your team where they are, and then you adjust yourself as well. So it's really like establishing a relationship with them to really get to know them. And
So the worst you can do is go to sprint planning, then go to Boracay for the next 2 weeks.
So yeah, I guess we're good. If you have any more questions, you can post it in Product PH, or you can message Ian as well. I believe they also have a meetup tomorrow. If you have any questions, Agile Philippines?
Yes. Yeah. So we have a meetup tomorrow at QuadX. So it's going to be 7 p.m. Then
Guys, just be silent about the product owner that you shoot.
Yeah, please.
So you might meet him or her there.
Whatever we talk about here.
May not be there.
She's from QuadX. They're hosting the Agile Philippines.
You can search for, you can go to agilephilippines.org for the link and whatnot. I heard there's a food cart though. Food carts.
And can I also just plug? So I'm part of EX Philippines as well. We have a conference in May. It's May 26 to 27 in Globe here in BGC. So if you want to, go to that conference and talk about design, how to do UX, how does it work with Agile teams, how to fit in as a product owner or a product manager, consider going to EX Philippines. So you can check out the tickets at exphilippines.com.
Okay, so I guess that's it. So just in the next few months, it's going to be very exciting in the next few months for product, because we already know what we're going to do, unlike last year that we're making it every month. So there's going to be a lot of exciting talks in the next few months. We're going to do product research, product design, basically product and work. So, and that's our next 5 months leading up to something that we're cooking up at the end of the year. So thank you for coming. And thank you to Ian. This has been a very and thank you as well for everyone else who participated. And there's still more pizza here. And thank you to Zalora. Sorry.
Thank you for attending this event. So I'm calling from Zalora. So since we're already blocked here, so I'm actually a recruiter from Zalora. Anyone interested, you can always just take me. I would like to go around to
also setting up a new split of business, which is very, very exciting. So that's something that is very, very new that is, we're going to launch that very, very soon. And I've heard that a lot of you guys are also developers, and product owners and product managers.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing. You can build the culture from scratch.
So that's something that we just did actually just a few days ago, like having our own culture workshop. So it's actually, I guess, the perfect timing if you be a part of that kind of.
They have a very good senior director of product management, Sylvia.
Yes.
And yeah, she's really good. So if you're gonna join them, you're gonna learn a lot from her.
Right. So just a bit of plugging there.
Okay, so again, next guys, pizza, drinks. Oh, sorry, we're gonna take a photo, I guess. So everyone, please come here so the photos there. Guys, let's just go outside for the photo.
Yeah, it's going to be
I just prefer casters on right. But it's even funnier because my last name is CC7. It's like the Twitter building.
Yeah. I used to live like, building actually. Yeah, Northeast it's hilarious. Yeah. Right? Yeah, it's like something coming back. I'm going back to yeah. So, are you going back anytime soon? June? Yeah. So, pretty much should be back in April, and then I'm going to move back here in May. So, yeah.
So that's the
no, actually. So he spoke to them about logistics, which so this one of my good friends is this. So I was just curious that we were chatting over coffee. So yeah, I told me about that, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. So he's like, if you need No, it's a separate thing. It just happened to be, it was just coincidence that it was here, and I got a bit who turned out to work for me. So, yeah.
What's your background?
So I just got back in San Francisco, and recently, basically, I was a PM, working on operations also there. So, first of all, startup. Yeah.
You can send a message to him. You can always drop it to me so we can start the conversations. So we'll definitely be happy.
Yeah. When do you expect?
As soon as the better, because we're actually launching the content very soon. It's actually quite out there already.
I mean,
it's a Maccabi, right?
With the other side of oh, just to say outside this meeting. Great.
Uy, kumusta? Long time no see eh. Busy. Saan ka pa din?
Ako yung last day ako last week.
Ah, so you're starting out your own? Or changing jobs?
Kaya nagpula sa client. Nag-enroll muna ako last week. Last week din nag-start, nag-enroll muna ako for
Ah, talaga? Ano yung course?
Ano lang, test lang. So, try ko muna habang mag-figure out ito yung next step ko.
That's good. So at least study break kumbaga.
Yeah.
Oy. Bye. Saan yung birthday boy? Birthday boy. Thanks for having me. How do you feel about the Fishbowl?
Yeah,
somehow it worked.
Actually, there are three functions, right? So one super experience facilitator, another is a key.
Yeah. Really. I was scared as well in the beginning because we went out as we go along.
I think that's those guys are from Agile community.
I'm not sure. Nick is, I think, but the other guy.
It's getting better.
Yeah, and then they're
You actually they raised a lot of our questions, more like to ask a question.
Yes, because no one is asking.
Right. You started the fire. Literally.
I think really this number, we invited actually too much. It's over 50.
Yeah, over 50?
Yeah, so I felt sorry because oh my god, open space is impossible.
Yeah, the space you can need more, but you don't have enough.
Yeah.
This actually worked, I think. So, crab space.
Yeah.
I mean, the Fishbowl somehow worked with the space.
Yeah. It's really interesting format. And then what is funny is finally the developer guys share ideas.
We just need to ask something regarding the devs and they'll protect their
we have a long discussion about the developers.
Actually, more like for me, hearing the concept itself, rather than that, to hear how other stakeholders feel, that's really the new. So actually, this time it was some information and really finally very good for me. I like to hear.
Yeah, you do have something.
Yeah, but it's
it's better it's in BGC rather than in Maccabi.
BGC? Yeah, I always tell them it's better in BGC.
Because you moved to BGC so
Maybe because it's also a bit closer, like you have a lot of companies there and there's, like just within a certain radius.
If it's BGC and specifically something that's very reachable, like High Street, more people.
Because if you go to Makati, it's hard to enter Makati at this time. So maybe that's a challenge. I was surprised as well. We have a lot of people.
Normally, the biggest people will go.
I think this is the largest group that I've attended.
Yeah, largest actually. Actually, a lot of people who were probably.
Last month's topic was more interesting actually, I think, but I was able to attend the meeting.
Ganda ng office na sana.
Saan yung last one?
Sa Kanban.
Sa Kanban, Kanban.
Ganda ng office na. Multiple floors.
How many attendees did you get sa Kanban? Because they have a big space as well.
Registered, I think it was only 30 or 40, but I think it was around 50 there. But we also got a lot of Kanban.
Yeah. That's good.
But there were more new product learners. There's a lot less tech people, more new people.
Okay. So this time actually,
this
a lot
was
of
a
new
lot
people.
more experienced people that are there.
This is a sound.
That was what I was afraid of earlier. We might get people who are new to Agile and wanting to hear new, like foundation introduction stuff. So it's a good thing at least we have a mix of experiences.
What I noticed is the team which integrate partially Agile cannot tend not to raise hand. So even for me, the how to raise their question, because okay, I know the framework, but I'm not following it. So that's
I think sometimes it also benefits if you have not started with the framework. It just is.
Yeah, it's more like a partially
integrated. There are people who starts in an organization that's already agile. They don't appreciate what it was before.
Yeah, I saw we're agile when it's very strict. It was just not supposed to be, especially when the biggest problem with agile is there's agile practitioners who think that who are living it beyond the spirit. Like this is the spirit of agile, but they're like doing a lot of structures in terms of what you need to do in a
Actually, the environment is different.
So it's not like, for example, the stand-up meetings on every day takes you an hour and a half. But no one's saying anything of value.
So we scrap that and we have four daily meetings for just a small team.
That's my last thing. There's a lot of there's a lot of premium on the certificates. Like, oh, I have a Scrum certificate.
No, that's true. We hate it. We hate it actually.
We're not agile anymore. We're like a mini waterfall.
Kasi when you take a 2-day course, you get out, you're certified.
I actually take the certification, but I don't feel anything.
No, but
it's a good start.
It's a good start.
It's a good start, but you don't stop there. I guess the problem is when people take the certification, go out and feel like that's it.
This is just companies looking for certification.
That's the problem. It's impossible. So nothing changed.
Alright, well, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Thanks.
And then this will become an awesome article by
Next month.
Yeah. Thank you.